A single line in my inbox. No signature, no explanation, just a system notification with the clinical precision of a scalpel. Contract termination effective immediately. Not from HR, not from my manager. From a ghost account buried in the architecture I'd built with my own hands over 13 years. They thought I'd disappear quietly. Like a deleted file swept into digital oblivion. They were wrong. The systems remember everything, and so do I. I'm Natalie Sanders. And at 38, I've spent more nights with server logs than most people spend with their families. Senior Systems Architect at Redbridge Capital Systems, a company that processes billions in automated financial transactions daily, where milliseconds mean millions and downtime is measured in catastrophe. That Monday morning felt different before I even opened my laptop. The kind of different that makes your coffee taste like metal and your gut clench with algorithmic precision. I'd been running on 4 hours of sleep, having spent the weekend patching a critical vulnerability in our Asian market interfaces. Standard procedure for me, the ghost in the machine who kept the money flowing while executives took credit at board meetings. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. No subject line, no corporate letterhead. Just a sterile system notification that read like a server error. Contract termination effective immediately. The sender wasn't human. It was a technical service account, the kind used for automated processes and system maintenance. Not HR, not my direct supervisor, not even a courtesy call from the department head I'd saved from 3 different SEC violations over the past 5 years. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard like a pianist frozen mid-symphony. 13 years of my life reduced to a single line of code. No explanation, no warning. No acknowledgement that I was the only person in the building who understood the intricate DNA of every system keeping this company alive. The termination wasn't just cold, it was surgical. Calculated. Someone had deliberately bypassed every protocol, every courtesy, every basic human decency that comes with ending a career. This wasn't firing someone. This was erasing them. I checked my access credentials. Still active. My security badge, still working? My administrative privileges, intact? Whoever orchestrated this had made their first mistake. They'd forgotten that terminating an employee and terminating their system access were 2 entirely different processes. In their haste to silence me, they'd left me with keys to the kingdom. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd used my own system architecture to deliver the killing blow, never considering that the architect always leaves herself a way back in. Every great system needs a failsafe. Every complex network needs a guardian. And every guardian worth their salt knows that sometimes the greatest threat comes from within. As I sat in my cubicle, still legally my cubicle for the next few hours, I realized something profound. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd fundamentally misunderstood the difference between an employee and a systems architect. Employees can be fired. Systems architects are woven into the very fabric of what they create. They thought they were cutting me loose. Instead, they just activated something they never knew existed. 13 years. That's how long I'd been invisible to everyone who mattered and indispensable to everything that worked. I started as a single mother with a computer science degree and desperation sharp enough to cut through any corporate barrier. Late nights debugging legacy code while my daughter slept. Weekends spent in empty offices, rebuilding systems that previous architects had abandoned like broken toys. I became the person they called when everything else failed. The ghost who fixed what couldn't be fixed, who understood the ancient protocols that kept billion-dollar trades flowing seamlessly across continents. They'd promoted me in title, but never in visibility. Always the technical expert, never the strategic leader. Then came Evan Marsh, 34, Vice President of Infrastructure, with a Harvard MBA and the kind of manufactured charisma that made boardrooms light up. He had the smile of someone who'd never spent a night wondering if the rent would clear, the confidence of someone who'd never had to prove themselves with code instead of connections. Evan didn't know a server from a sandwich, but he knew how to make my work sound like his vision. He'd hover near my desk during the complex rebuilds, asking questions with the earnestness of a student and the calculating eyes of a predator. "Walk me through this architecture," he'd say, recording everything on his phone under the guise of learning the technical foundations. Within 6 months, Evan was presenting my system designs to the board. My optimization strategies became his innovation initiatives. My crisis management protocols became his leadership excellence. He called me our open-source legacy expert in meetings, a phrase that sounded like respect but felt like burial. The pattern was surgical in its precision. He'd extract knowledge through casual conversations, then package it into PowerPoint presentations that made him look like a visionary. When executives praised the new Marsh methodology for system reliability, I sat in the back row of meetings, watching my intellectual DNA get attributed to someone who probably couldn't configure a home rotor. But Evan's greatest talent wasn't theft, it was replacement. He understood that you don't eliminate someone like me through confrontation. You make them redundant. You create the narrative that they're outdated, resistant to change, stuck in old ways of thinking. "We need fresh perspectives," he'd say during restructuring discussions. Sometimes expertise can become a limitation. I watched him work with the detached fascination of a systems analyst studying a particularly elegant virus. He didn't need to know how the systems worked, he just needed to know how to make people believe he did. And slowly, methodically, he began positioning himself as my inevitable replacement. The beautiful irony was that Evan genuinely believed his own performance. He'd convinced himself that charisma and presentation were more valuable than the intricate knowledge keeping their entire operation from collapsing. He saw me as outdated infrastructure that needed upgrading. He was right about one thing: I was infrastructure. But he misunderstood what that meant. Infrastructure doesn't just power systems. When it fails, it takes everything else down with it. 1 month before the email that erased me, I found the flaw that would kill them. It was buried deep in the new routing module that Evan had fast-tracked into production, a piece of code so fundamentally broken it made my teeth ache. The kind of vulnerability that doesn't announce itself with alarms and flashing lights. It whispers, it waits, and then, when the trading volume hits peak load, it strangles the entire system like a digital tourniquet. I spent 3 sleepless nights documenting everything: transaction flow diagrams, risk assessments, failure scenarios that read like a financial apocalypse. The math was brutally simple. Under normal conditions, the system would hiccup. Under stress, it would hemorrhage money faster than a severed artery. My report was 47 pages of surgical precision. Every line of problematic code highlighted, every potential failure point mapped. Every recommendation backed by a decade of infrastructure knowledge that couldn't be Googled or delegated. I submitted it through proper channels, marked it critical, requested immediate review. Evan's response came within hours, not a technical review, but a meeting invitation. Infrastructure Strategy Session: Building Forward-Thinking Solutions. The kind of corporate doublespeak that meant I was about to be managed. The conference room felt like a tribunal. Evan sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 junior developers who looked like they'd been briefed on exactly what to say. He opened with that practiced smile, the one that made boardrooms feel safe. "We appreciate your thoroughness," he began, "but we need to discuss your resistance to innovation. This kind of analysis paralysis is exactly what's been slowing down our modernization efforts." Analysis paralysis. As if preventing financial catastrophe was a character flaw. "The code is fundamentally unstable," I said, keeping my voice level. "Under high-volume trading conditions, you're looking at system lockup or transaction corruption. The math doesn't lie." "Math is just one perspective," Evan replied smoothly. "Sometimes you have to trust the vision over the variables." Vision over variables. I watched him turn my technical expertise into a limitation, my caution into cowardice. The junior developers nodded along, eager to please the man who controlled their career trajectories. 3 days later, I checked the system documentation. My report had vanished, not archived, not marked as reviewed, completely deleted, as if it had never existed. When I searched the backup logs, those entries had been purged too. I tried to access the technical review queue. My credentials had been downgraded. I could still log in. But my warnings now carried the weight of a suggestion, not a mandate. My technical authority had been quietly amputated. That's when I understood the true elegance of Evan's method. He hadn't just stolen my work, he'd systematically dismantled my ability to protect the company from itself. Every warning I'd raised, every critical flaw I'd identified, every piece of institutional knowledge I'd accumulated, it was all being rewritten as the paranoid ramblings of someone who couldn't adapt to change. They hadn't just ignored my warnings, they'd erased them. And in doing so, they'd created exactly the conditions that would prove me right. I sat in my cubicle, staring at the clean, empty documentation system where my report should have been, and realized something profound. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a systems architect isn't to fire them. It's to stop listening to them while they're still inside the system. 3 years ago, I watched them destroy Marcus Rivera. Marcus was a brilliant database administrator who'd caught irregularities in the trading algorithms, subtle patterns that suggested someone was skimming fractions of cents from millions of transactions. Corporate pocket change that added up to grand theft. He documented everything, presented it to management, and asked the right questions. 2 weeks later, Marcus was gone. Performance issues, they said. Inability to work within team parameters. His access was revoked overnight. His desk cleared by security. His concerns buried in the same digital graveyard where inconvenient truths go to die. I learned something that day. In a system designed to eliminate oversight, the overseers become the primary threat. That's when I began building Sentinel Lock. Not revenge, not sabotage, insurance. I embedded it deep in the core architecture, hidden within the routine maintenance protocols that kept the system healthy. To anyone examining the code, it looked like standard fail-safe procedures, automated backups, security validations, system integrity checks, the kind of redundant safety measures that good architects build into critical infrastructure. But Sentinel Lock was different. It was watching, learning, waiting. The logic was elegantly simple. If my administrative access was terminated without proper HR authorization, the kind of paperwork trail that legitimate firings require, the system would initiate a 72-hour countdown. Not a virus, not destruction, just a complete lockdown of internal access protocols. Every login would fail. Every administrative command would return null. Every attempt to access core systems would hit a wall of encrypted silence. The external trading interfaces would continue functioning normally, but internal control would simply stop. I designed it to be surgical. No data destruction, no external damage. Just the complete inability to manage, modify, or troubleshoot the systems that processed billions in daily transactions. Like pulling the steering wheel out of a car while it's still moving, everything keeps working until something needs adjustment. The countdown would only stop with proper documentation, termination paperwork signed by HR, legal review, and executive approval. The paper trail that proves someone's firing was legitimate, not a backroom execution. I told myself it was protection for the next Marcus Rivera, a way to ensure that critical warnings couldn't be silenced without due process. A mechanism to force accountability in a system designed to avoid it. But as I refined the code over 3 years, adding layers of encryption and hiding it deeper in the system's DNA, I knew I was building something more personal. I was creating consequences for people who believe that expertise could be discarded like outdated hardware. The beauty of Sentinel Lock wasn't its complexity, it was its simplicity. No external triggers, no manual activation. Just a quiet monitoring system that would spring to life only when someone made a very specific mistake, treating a senior systems architect like disposable personnel. I tested it carefully, documenting every pathway and fail-safe. I created legitimate override procedures that would work if someone understood the system well enough to implement them. But that understanding lived in exactly one place: my head. Sentinel Lock became my insurance policy against corporate amnesia, a guarantee that removing me from the system would create exactly the kind of crisis that would force them to remember why they'd kept me around for 13 years. I never expected to need it. For 3 years, it lay dormant in the code, a digital time bomb with no timer, waiting for someone to be stupid enough to light the fuse. Then Evan Marsh decided I was redundant. Now, as I sat staring at that single-line termination email, I could almost hear the gentle click of Sentinel Lock's activation. Somewhere in the system's depths, a countdown had begun. 72 hours to prove that my termination was legitimate. They had no idea what they'd just triggered, but they would. From my apartment, I watched the digital ecosystem I'd built begin to whisper. The first signs were subtle, micro delays in transaction processing that Evan's team would dismiss as network latency, response times creeping from milliseconds to seconds. The kind of degradation that looks like growing pains. Not system failure, but I knew better. I'd embedded those early warnings into the international API connections, hidden messages that only I could decode. The London servers started returning slightly different timestamp formats. The Tokyo exchanges began receiving acknowledgments with fractional delays. Singapore's trading algorithms detected pattern variations that triggered their own cautionary protocols. None of it was obvious. None of it was catastrophic. Yet, I monitored the corporate communications channels from my personal devices, access they'd forgotten to revoke in their haste to erase me. Evan's confident voice echoed through conference calls, dismissing concerns as typical optimization opportunities and expected growing pains from our infrastructure modernization. He had no idea he was watching the opening movement of a symphony I'd composed 3 years ago. The beauty of Sentinel Lock wasn't just its hidden nature, it was its patience. Unlike human revenge, which burns hot and fast, this was algorithmic justice, cold, calculated, inexorable. By hour 36, the international partners began asking questions. Not panic, just professional curiosity about minor anomalies in their API responses. The kind of questions that competent systems architects address with quick explanations and immediate fixes. But Evan wasn't a systems architect. He was a presentation layer built on top of stolen expertise. I watched him scramble through emergency meetings, delegating technical questions to junior developers who'd never seen the core architecture. They ran standard diagnostics, finding nothing wrong because they were looking for conventional failures. They checked server loads, network connectivity, database performance, all the obvious metrics that showed green lights while the deeper systems quietly unraveled. The partners' questions grew more pointed. Why were the handshake protocols inconsistent? Why were the response codes following patterns that suggested systematic rather than random issues? Why did the anomalies seem to cluster around specific infrastructure components? Evan's answers became increasingly generic. Corporate speak that sounded confident but carried no actual technical substance. We're implementing enhanced monitoring procedures. Our team is conducting comprehensive analysis. We're confident in our system's robust architecture. But confidence doesn't debug failing code, and corporate buzzwords don't explain why systems are behaving like they're slowly losing their minds. By hour 48, the first major international client suspended their automated trading protocols. Not because of any catastrophic failure, but because their risk management systems detected what they called systemic behavioral inconsistencies in Redbridge's responses. When billion-dollar trading algorithms detect patterns they don't understand, they do the smart thing. They stop. I sat in my apartment, watching the countdown timer I'd built into my personal monitoring system. 24 hours remaining. The whispers were about to become screams. Evan had no idea that every frustrated call, every puzzled technical meeting, every attempt to diagnose problems he couldn't understand was bringing him closer to the moment when the system would stop whispering and start shouting. The machine was about to remind them who built it. 72 hours, precisely. At 8:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, exactly 3 days after that termination email, Sentinel Lock stopped whispering and started screaming. The failure was beautiful in its completeness. No explosions, no dramatic system crashes. Just silence. Every administrative interface returned authentication errors. Every diagnostic tool hit encrypted walls. Every attempt to access core management functions simply failed with the bureaucratic politeness of a system that had forgotten how to be helpful. The trading algorithms continued running. I'd designed it that way. External clients still received their data feeds. Market connections remained stable, but internally. Redbridge Capital Systems had become a ghost ship, fully operational but completely uncontrollable. I monitored the emergency communications from my apartment like a conductor following a symphony. Evan's voice cracked through the conference calls, no longer smooth and confident, but sharp with panic. "We're experiencing temporary administrative access issues," he announced to increasingly hostile partners. "Our technical team is implementing immediate solutions." His technical team consisted of 3 junior developers who'd spent the morning running every diagnostic they knew. They found nothing wrong because the system wasn't broken. It was locked. Every server responded perfectly to external requests while systematically rejecting internal management commands. By 10 a.m., the first major client had suspended trading. By noon, 3 international partners had activated their contingency protocols. By 2 p.m., the stock price had dropped 12% as automated trading algorithms detected the systematic lockout and interpreted it as a security breach. The emergency board meeting convened at 3 p.m. I didn't need to be there. I could track the panic through the system logs, watching as administrators desperately tried to regain control of their own infrastructure. Every login attempt failed. Every override command returned null. Every emergency protocol hit the same polite, impenetrable wall. They called in external consultants, cybersecurity experts, system recovery specialists. Each expert spent hours examining code that looked perfectly normal, running diagnostics that returned healthy results, searching for malware that didn't exist. Because Sentinel Lock wasn't malware, it was architecture. The beauty of the system was its legitimacy. Every security protocol was properly implemented. Every access control was precisely configured. Every authentication requirement was technically correct. The system was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, protecting itself from unauthorized access. The problem was that everyone with administrative privileges had suddenly become unauthorized. At 4:30 p.m., someone finally noticed the pattern. Every failed access attempt pointed back to the same missing component: my terminated administrative credentials. The system was looking for authorization from an account that had been deleted, and without that authorization, it refused to grant access to anyone. The logs were clear, clinical in their precision. Every administrative request led back to the same requirement: verification from senior systems architect Natalie Sanders. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed CEO direct line, not his assistant, not his secretary, him. "We need you," he said without preamble. His voice carried the weight of someone watching hundreds of millions of dollars evaporate in real time. "Whatever happened, whatever went wrong, we need you to fix this." I let the silence stretch for exactly 10 seconds, long enough for him to understand that this conversation was happening on my terms now. "The system is working perfectly," I said finally. "It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. I don't want money," I told the CEO. "I don't want my job back. I want the truth." The silence on the other end stretched like a held breath. In the background, I could hear the chaos of the emergency command center, multiple voices, ringing phones, the sound of a company hemorrhaging credibility in real time. "What kind of truth?" he asked finally. "A formal statement, signed by you, the CTO, and legal, acknowledging that Evan Marsh used unauthorized administrative access to terminate my employment without HR approval, that he forged the termination email, that he systematically suppressed my technical warnings, and that Sentinel Lock is an authorized security protocol, not a malicious attack. That's a significant admission. The system has been locked for 6 hours. Your stock price is down 18%. 3 major clients have suspended trading. How significant does it need to get?" I could hear him conferring with others, muffled voices arguing about legal liability and corporate exposure. But the math was simple. Every minute of delay cost them millions. and I was the only person who could restore their access. If we provide this statement, he said carefully, you'll restore the system. I'll enter my administrative credentials and unlock the protocols. The system will return to normal operations within minutes. And Evan, that's your decision, but the statement goes on the record. 2 hours later, I received the document, 3 signatures, 3 acknowledgments that I'd been right about everything, 3 admissions that corporate politics had nearly destroyed $1 billion company. I drove to the office for the first time in 3 days. The building buzzed with emergency energy, consultants, executives, technicians all trying to solve a problem that required exactly one solution: me. They escorted me to the main server room like I was defusing a bomb. In a way, I was. I logged into the primary console, entered my credentials, and spoke the unlock command I'd embedded 3 years ago. Sentinel stands down. The system responded immediately, administrative access restored, management protocols reactivated. The gentle hum of normal operations returned as if nothing had happened. Evan was nowhere to be seen. I learned later that he'd been terminated properly through HR, with appropriate documentation, while I was driving to the office. His security badge had been deactivated, his office had been cleared. His corporate existence had been erased with the same clinical precision he'd used on me. But I wasn't interested in his downfall. I was interested in the precedent. The formal statement became part of the corporate record, a document that acknowledged the difference between an employee and a systems architect, between political maneuvering and technical expertise, between what looks replaceable and what actually keeps the lights on. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I simply walked out of the building, knowing that the next Marcus Rivera would have documentation proving that warnings matter, that expertise has value, that some people can't be erased with a single line of code. The system remembers everything, and now, officially, so do they. Thank you for listening to this story of justice through architecture. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on workplace justice and standing up for what's right.